I think we'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. We are very pleased to welcome you to the 6th webinar of the 2024 edition of the Data Collection Webinar Series, which is organized by the Data Collection Unit at UNICEF headquarters. My name is Archana Dwavedi, and I work in the Data and Analytics section here at UNICEF headquarters. Just a little bit about this series. The 2024 edition focuses on the Multiple Indicator Cluster Surveys, or MICS. We are delving into different aspects of MICS, implementation at the country level. We're exploring new modules, tools and features, as well as exploring various household survey facets. Webinars are being held about every 2 weeks on Wednesdays from 8 to 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Today's webinar is entitled Estimating Level of Effort and Cost for Implementing Household Surveys, the Case of MICS. Before we get started, just some housekeeping rules. So we have scheduled about an hour and 30 minutes today, including Q&A. Throughout the webinar, please remain muted and kindly write your questions in the Q&A box. You can do that throughout the presentation. We will try and group your questions and direct them to the presenters during the Q&A session. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the MICS YouTube channel, together with past webinars. The recording will also be available on the UNICEF SharePoint site. You can find links to both of these in the announcement that you received. So now back to the main event. As I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is entitled Estimating Level of Effort and Cost for Implementing Household Surveys, the Case of MICS. So very happy to have with us Attila Hancioglu, who is the Chief Data Collection Unit and the Global Coordinator for the MICS program from the Data and Analytics section at UNICEF, and also Pedersen, who is a household survey expert. So now I'll hand it off to Attila. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Archana, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining today. So we have around 30 slides, I think, so I will get started with the slides. We're talking about estimating level of effort and cost for household surveys today. And we are using MICS. We are describing a method that we developed specifically for MICS. And I will start with the rationale why we have this method developed. Basically, this is a method for quantifying the level of effort needed to implement individual topics and questionnaires in MICS surveys. And then we will talk about the results and applications of this method. I will talk about some of the properties of the method, and then I will hand it over to Bo to talk about linking level of effort, this method, with cost. And we will end up with the way forward on this methodology. So let's talk about the rationale first. In the MICS, in the 7th round of MICS, we have a new questionnaire architecture and expanded content relative to the previous round, the MICS 6. And there might be those of you who are not familiar with this new architecture and expanded content, so I will a little bit later talk about it. Now, what this brings is, as I mentioned already, the new architecture, it has brought in expanded content. So we felt from the beginning that there was a need to quantify the magnitude of this expanded content, and then maybe compared with MICS 6 and earlier rounds. The thing is, when we move from one round to the next, we always have lots of changes. I'm referring to the standard questionnaires of MICS, and then we always talk about an expansion, a proliferation of the content, but we don't have tools to quantify that change. So there has been a need to quantify this change, and this is what the method is basically about. By doing this, we thought that we could always use this tool to sensitize survey managers at the country level to the magnitude of their undertaking with respect to their questionnaires. And we always talk about these things, that the one country's mixed survey has expanded content. It is much larger questionnaires. It is heavier in colloquial terms, but we never had a method to quantify it. So in quantitative terms, we can use this tool, we thought, to sensitize survey managers. And maybe this will help us to produce a way to control the size of the questionnaires at the country level in country applications. Because when we have a quantification of some kind, then we can perhaps be more cognizant of the fact that we're dealing with questionnaires which are beyond manageable levels. And of course, this brought in the possibility of looking into linking level of effort, what this methodology is about, to survey costs. And as we will describe later, this has been a huge demand from the beginning. So our starting point, and this is very important, this has always been very important for us, is that the level of effort that you need to include and implement a topic in a survey, in a mix. A topic, a module, or a set of questions is actually not linearly related to or simply a function of the number of questions. We always have these discussions. We are looking at a new topic, which comes in the form of a module, and the module includes only 5 questions. So it is very simple to add it, or it will not take extra effort to add it onto an existing survey. But that's not really the case always, because there's a number of other dimensions that we have to take into account as survey managers, be it in the case of the Global Mix program, or be it in the case of the application of mix at the country level. There are various other dimensions that we need to consider, basically, which include, for example, the amount of preparatory work that will be needed for inclusion of the topic. For example, customization. There might be a series of preparatory events or activities that you have to execute before you even think of including those questions and administer them to the respondents. Or you have to take into account the amount of time that it will take to complete the set of questions in question. For example, you might be looking at 5 questions in a roster, 5 repetitive questions in a roster form for all the household members, or 5 questions for an individual respondent. Those are 2 different things, although the number of questions is the same. The amount of time that it will take to complete these questions, because of the number of respondents, is going to be different too. Or the amount of effort that you need to produce the final data. You collect the data, you have these questions in the questionnaire, but then there's going to be some effort involved in making sure that that you have the final data for as a result of data processing, and make sure that it can be analyzed properly. And there's more of these dimensions. So we started from here, the development of this method, and then we thought we could actually define these dimensions. And we ended up defining 10 of them. So for the inclusion and successful implementation of a topic in a mix, then we thought these 10 dimensions would need to be taken into consideration as efforts that you need to put into this whole effort. Whether the topic is challenging to customize, whether it is lengthy, there's a few questions or a lot of questions, and whether it is an exogenous topic to us, to the survey managers, whether it is a topic that we have to do research on, we have to understand, whether it requires extra logistics. Some topics come in with a lot of work that needs to be done beforehand, before the fieldwork, but also during the fieldwork. Whether the topic requires changes in survey design or eligibility, because we have certain defined sets of people that we administer the questions to. And if a topic changes that eligibility, then we have something more complicated. Some topics require increases in sample size or design. And there's a burden aspect of every topic that is in a survey. There might be topics which are more burdensome on the training. You have to train more in depth. There might be a burden on supervision during the fieldwork, monitor it as part of monitoring the fieldwork. There might be a burden on data processing and analysis. And finally, probably the most important of all, is the burden on the respondent. Now, after we settled on these 10 dimensions, we thought this is fine, this looks good, and there has been some time that we have been developing this, and we have tested these 10 dimensions and have had lengthy discussions about them. But more recently, we thought, well, there should be a compounding term here too. And I will explain what the compounding term is when I get to the actual calculation methodology. But before I do so, what is the material at hand? What have we applied this method to? In the sixth round of mix, we had one set of standard questionnaires, the ones that you see on the screen, 5 in all, which included 55 topics. There was no optional, modules or topics. There was only an architecture of one set of questionnaires, 55 containing 55 topics. But then in mix 7, we landed on a different architecture. We thought that we could create a short questionnaires with topics that are applicable in all settings, which are confined to a subset of modules already in mix 6, by the way. We can have these short questionnaires, base questionnaires, meaning questionnaires to start from in terms of building your questionnaires. And then we can have complementary topics, which we will keep outside of the base questionnaires. And these would be topics that were already in mix 6, plus some new topics that have been high scoring. What does it mean, high scoring? Well, quite soon, on the 22nd of May, I think, we're going to have another webinar where we explain the development of this, where you will see that we have developed a method to score each and every topic. And then on the basis of that, we decide whether the topic goes into the base questionnaires or goes into the complementary topics package. So in addition to the complementary, well, let me mention numbers now first, before I go on. In the base questionnaires of the mix 7, we have 18 topics. In the complementary topics, we have 40 of them. And in addition, of course, we have those topics which do not make the cut. We call them topics on demand. These are topics that have been there for some time, but they have not scored high enough to get into complementary topics. We call them topics on demand. We keep them as possibilities, and some countries may want to use them. And there's 16 of those topics. And as I mentioned, there's a webinar coming up on May 22nd that you can join and to get into the details of this methodology. Now, therefore, let me go back to one slide again. We have 58 topics, in other words, in the standard questionnaires or mix, base questionnaire topics plus the complementary topics, 58 of them. But there's another 16 which are available on demand. So in total, we have 74 topics that we have used the methodology on that we are describing today. So what we did was, and I'm going to go step by step, we took all these 74 topics and scored them on each of the 10 dimensions of effort which I described earlier, which you can see on the screen. We used the same scale of scores for all dimensions, maximum 5 points and minimum 0 or 1. When it is 0, it means that the impact of including this topic is negligible or 0. But there are dimensions that you can see there, for instance, the burden on training or the burden on respondent, that even if the topic is a very short one, very easy one, you will still need to have some time allocated to it, some effort allocated to it. So we set the minimum of those to 1. And then we scored. this scoring that you see on the screen, starting from 0.0 for challenging to customize, all the way to burden on respondent 3.8. These are actually scores that we have for anthropometric measurements for under fives, which you will see in a few slides again in more detail. And these are scores for the time being that have been produced by only two people in our team, myself and Bo in this case. We have tried to make sure that we keep it as controlled as possible, the scoring. We have consistency, and we have been finding out that when we score the topics independently, the two of us, we always have a huge agreement with our scores. But whenever there isn't, we take an average. So this step is we score each of the topics on the basis of these 10 dimensions. But since we have the same scale for each of those 10 dimensions, we decided to assign weights to each of these dimensions of effort to be able to reflect the relative magnitude or impact of each of the dimensions on the total effort. We are trying to get at the total effort. Now, as I mentioned earlier, probably the most important one of these is the burden on respondents. So as you can see on the screen, in terms of the weights, the burden on respondent has the highest, 12.2, and the lowest is the exogenous topic dimension. We created these weights, not the two of us, but in this case, we went to a larger group of household survey experts, and we asked them between 1 and 15, what would be the weight that you would assign in terms of importance or the impact of each of these dimensions, and we took the average of those weights by different people. So after we have these as well, then we produce a weighted total level of effort for each topic and sum them across all dimensions. As you can see on the screen, in the case of this topic, we have 219.8 points of level of effort. But as I mentioned earlier, we thought this is not sufficient because there is an additional effort involved in terms of coordination and multitasking in cases where a specific topic requires above average efforts in multiple dimensions or compounds the effort. So we thought that we should be creating a compounding term and add to this for those situations when a certain topic is actually requiring extra efforts, above average efforts on many dimensions. It becomes a coordination, a multitasking issue. So that has to be taken into account too. So therefore, we calculated what we call a compounding term. And for each topic, this compounding term is calculated as the weighted sum of above average effort on each dimension. We calculated the average scores for each of the 10 dimensions, and we took each of the topics, and if a topic on any dimension is scoring above that overall average, we took that into account and summed it and added it to the initial level of effort score. In this case, 121.4, and here we have 341.2, the final total level of effort score for a topic. Let's see how it looks like with two topics, just to the simple comparison. There are two topics here: anthropometric measurements for under fives, and educational attendance, which is a household questionnaire topic. And as you can see, we have the range. I'm again showing the ranges of each of those dimensions. I'm showing the weights, which are constant for all the topics. And we have the scores for the anthropometric measurements and the educational attendance. And you have the products, the weighted products in both cases. And as you can see on the screen, we have for anthropometric measurements 341.2 scoring level of effort, And for educational attendance, we have 196.3. What does this mean? It means that according to these calculations, in terms of this overall index, overall score, and to include and successfully implement anthropometric measurements in mix requires much more effort than it does for educational attendance. And if you look at the components of this, we can easily see that the big differences come from extra logistics involved with anthropometric measurements, the burden it brings on training, on supervision, and on the respondent. Those are the dimensions where there's a big difference between the two topics. On the other hand, for the educational attendance, there's a lot of customization which is involved, which needs to be. We have to understand the educational system, the grades and classes, etc., and reflect them into the questionnaire. So there's an extra effort involved, which that doesn't exist for anthropometric measurements. So as a result of these calculations, we have a much higher score for anthropometric measurements. Now, for all this to happen, we have actually created an Excel sheet. I put it here. An Excel sheet which takes all of these 58 topics, in fact, the 74 topics, including those on demand too, and we have scored them, as you can see on the screen. And the Excel sheet actually calculates the level of effort, the compounding term, and the total final level of effort for each of the topics. And we have a number of other columns that we use to create some metadata and do some analysis on the basis of these. These scores, by the way, the topic-specific scores for each of the dimensions, of course, as I mentioned, have been produced by us. But at the country level, if there's going to be an application of this, and some countries have applied this already, these scores can be changed for any topic. But we will come back to that in terms of making it more robust a little bit later in the presentation. So in case the image on the screen is too small, let me show a few things. On the left of this, we have all the topics. As mentioned there, the base questionnaire topics, complementary, and topics on demand. We have the questionnaire where they belong to. And then on the right-hand side, we have the scores for each of the topics and the final calculations for each of the topic. There's much more in this Excel sheet, in actual fact, including some applications, some templates on how this can be used, as well as some sheets in the Excel file which describe the methodology. And that will be available soon from the program. This is how the level of effort scores distribute. This is just for the base and complementary topics. The values range from just below 50 points to close to 450, I think. And we will actually see the championship table, as I call it, which is this. We've been looking at the highest scoring and the lowest scoring topics on level of effort. The highest scoring 5 topics are mental health, foundational learning skills, fertility and mortality, which is the birth story, immunization, and violence against women. In actual fact, if you look at the first 10, they are mostly topics which require a lot of customization, a lot of logistics. In some cases, they are long set of questions, like in the case of fertility and mortality. In terms of the burden of respondent, there are sensitivity issues involved. In some cases, the topic in question forces the respondent with a lot of memory, remembering events in detail in the past, etc. So it's as a composite result of that, we have these 10 topics which are scoring highest. On the right-hand side, we have the topics which are lowest scoring, and typically they are topics which do not require customization. They're based on a few sets of questions. In one case, there's actually one question or 2 questions. They don't put a lot of burden on the respondent, etc. So as you can see from here, for the 58 topics from the complementary set as well as the base questionnaire topics, we have a maximum of 438, down to 41.3 points. So, some results and applications of this, possible applications of this. In terms of the status of each of those 74 topics in the mix 7, we have been looking at the average levels of effort for each of the topics and for each of those categories, and also the sums. As it shows on the screen, overall, the average level of effort that we are getting for all these 74 topics is 143.3. It seems that the topics that are included in mix-based questionnaires have the highest averages in terms of level of effort. So we have heavier topics in the base questionnaires, and those topics on demand have lower averages. But in terms of the total, this also shows that since we have a short set of questionnaires with only a limited number of topics in the base questionnaires, the sum of effort there is still lower compared to those of the complementary topics, for which we have 40 topics in all. So this is just some metadata as a result of this application. But how about looking at the level of effort with respect to the sectors that these topics come from? The table on the left is confined to base and complementary topics. As you can see, we have come up with these sectors for each of the topics that we have included in the analysis, 58 of them, base and complementary. And there's a number of sectors for which there's a number of topics and sectors having higher scores than the others. Typically, we have emergencies, 334, highest, because the emergencies, for the emergency, we have one topic actually, post-emergency module in mix, which requires additional samples, a lot of customization, etc. You have some low averages for child development. That's also one topic, early childhood development, which is very standard, and customization is very limited, if any. We have child protection topics, many of them included in mix, but on the average, the effort that we need to have in place to implement them, implement them, the child protection ones, is relatively low. But the sum is high because there's many of those topics included. We still have a large number for the RMNCH, reproductive, maternal, newborn health, and child health topics towards the bottom of the screen. Now, going from mix 6 and from mix 6 to mix 7, what has happened in terms of the content of the questionnaires? Can we use this method to describe it? And the answer is yes, of course. Upon calculation of this level of effort, we see that the total level of effort which was involved in the mix 6 standard questionnaires, I'm not talking about the country questionnaires, but the standard questionnaires, which was, as I described earlier, one set of questionnaires, the total level of effort needed was 6,974 points. In mix 7, if you take the base questionnaire topics and the complementary topics, we have gone up to 8,784 points, which implies an increase of 26% in the level of effort. So we are increasing the amount of effort that we have to put into place if we were to implement all of these standard questionnaire modules and topics, which is not the case, of course. At the country level, there's a lot of customization that happens. So I put here, we have a number of surveys which have gone ahead and designed their questionnaires. Some have even finished fieldwork. So I've been looking at what is happening at the country level. And if for one country, you see the table on the screen. For one country, we've looked at this, and this country had a mix 6. And the mix 6, the total level of effort of their questionnaires was about 6,000. Now they have gone out to 6,500, and there's a 9% increase in the level of effort. In the process, some topics have been dropped, which were there in Mix 6. Some new ones have been taken on, and the result is a 9% increase along these terms. Now, if we break that down, the Mix 7 country questionnaire that I'm describing, the total level of effort can be distributed according to where they got the topics from. As you can see, about 40% of the content of the Mix 7 questionnaires of that country is coming from the base questionnaire topics of the mixed program. 54% of them are coming from complementary topics. The country, as they did before, had included some country-specific topics, a few country-specific topics, and they still did the same in Mix 7, but only 2.5%. And then they took some topics from the topics on demand category, about 4.5%, that included in their country questionnaires too. Now we can use these kinds of analysis quite effectively and very informatively for a number of reasons. For ourselves meaning the global program, looking at many countries all at the same time, and these can be used at the country level too. For us, this tool can be very useful in describing the evolution or the overtime proliferation of the mixed questionnaires. We can actually do analysis on which sectors have gained more place in the mixed questionnaires. Have we been moving forward from Mix 3, for instance, to Mix 7 in terms of further populating the content of standard questionnaires with health, with protection, with development topics, or otherwise? These analyses can be done. We can do analyses at the country level too to see how the questionnaires have been changing over time. Now, having said that, of course, there's many more possible applications of this. Having said that, let me pause here and talk about the assumptions and properties of this methodology, and then we will move on to talking about cost. The level of effort, this is important to agree on, is an indicator to quantify the content of questionnaires and nothing else. So it's a quantitative method to describe what is in the questionnaires or mix. The dimensions are scored on the basis of the effort that needs to be in place for successful inclusion and implementation of topics. And it's not an indicator of the total level of effort for successfully conducting a survey. Ball will mention in a minute that there are those activities involved which are independent from the content of the questionnaires too, as well as fixed cost and variable costs. So these are important assumptions to understand about this methodology. In coming up with these scores with this methodology, we have excluded topics that need to be in all mixed surveys. There's those topics like the household members list, like the household characteristics, educational attainment. We have a module on mix plus consent, and we have a number of questions on background characteristics, so respondent in various questionnaires. We have kept them outside of this method and analysis and scoring, because they have to be in all mixed surveys. They're fixed. In doing so, in giving the scores to these topics on these 10 dimensions, we have assumed a medium-sized survey that includes all the questionnaires, all 5 questionnaires, and all the standard minimum activities that need to be in place, regardless of the content of a survey. So we had that in our mind when scoring. So therefore, the scoring that we did on the basis of these dimensions for all these topics is relative in nature, because of the assumption that we have this survey, which includes all the questionnaires and all the standard activities. So these are some of the assumptions. We move on now to linking this to costs and whether it can be done and under what assumptions And at this point, I give the floor to my colleague, Bo. Bo, please go ahead.
Thank you, Attila. Yeah, that's sort of the other aspect, but that we want to talk about today, because that it is a major need, or should I say, it's a major ask from lots and lots of people and organizations that we are working with as the Global Mix Program, that individual country national statistics officers are working with, that we would like to understand how much it costs to add things to the survey, or to distribute the cost of the survey by sector, for instance. There's lots of requests for this. And there has been some work, I know, from researchers, either or consultants hired by international organizations trying to establish this. I know that there are efforts ongoing into specific topics to figure out what would it cost to do this specific topic in a multi-topic survey, etc. But I think that the way that we have seen it has been as an incredibly useful, somewhat side product to the entire presentation that Attila just has given, because we started off from the aspect of wanting to understand what is the influence of the individual topics on the overall effort that we put into surveys, both individual surveys and from a global perspective. But we think there's something there. So we have been working on that for quite a long time, but it is very, very tricky, because what we have established is, as Attila basically ended on saying, is that we have, with the level of effort, looked at the level of effort it takes to implement a questionnaire. There are obviously many other aspects of household surveying. Costs is not driven by content alone, the size of the questionnaires or the extent of things that we're trying to measure. There are some fixed costs. I mean, I call them fixed, and accountants will be laughing at me. But it costs money to do a survey. Even if you do a tiny survey, there are certain things that cost money. You have to establish a machinery, right? You have to have committees. You have to have interviewers. You have to have cars. You need to have transport. You need to pay for fuel. All of these things are part of a survey that you must pay for. And then there's a variable cost on top of this, which is determined by how big your survey is and where do you need to go with your survey. Are we doing it in a small country with a fantastic road network, or we are doing it in a huge country with limited road network? Do we need to hire helicopters to visit certain locations? There are many, many aspects that go into this. But the way that we have come to a conclusion is that it appears that level of effort at the aggregate level is a good measure of distributing the total cost of the survey. Meaning, in every way that you cut, you have determined to cut your survey with a certain type of content, and if you split it by saying, the health sector is being covered by 25% of the survey, did the health sector contribute to 25% of the survey? It is not as straightforward as that, but it works in that manner, we think. And that's sort of a conclusion we've come to. But despite these fixed and variable costs, depending on size of the survey, there are some significant topic-specific variable costs that makes this attempt to look at level of effort directly into cost of topics makes it complicated. And I will go into that for a second. Can you switch the slide, please? Just so that we are clear. Here on the left side, I've tried to list, not extensively, but some of the overall aspects of a survey that have cost, that are there regardless of the content that we're looking at. As I mentioned, we have to set up a system. We have to plan our survey. We have to design our survey. There are people involved in that. It costs money. We have to hire meeting rooms and pay for snacks. And we have to do a pre-test. We have to take people to the field. And then there's an overall training exercise. We have to analyze the data. We have to report on the data. All of these are things that have to happen with all surveys, irrespective of whatever you're doing in the survey. And the variable costs are really, they go beyond fieldwork. They go beyond fieldwork and fieldwork monitoring. But that is by far the bulkiest determinant of a total survey cost, right? The bigger you make your sample, the longer you have to stay in the field, or the more people you have to send to the field, the more vehicles you need to hire, etc. It is an enormous component of the survey that increases its proportion the bigger you go. But then there are the topic specifically. For instance, you have supplies that you need for one topic alone. That's very simple to look at. But then maybe sometimes you need to hire an expert to deal with a topic, or hire an expert to customize a topic. For some things, for instance, when we are looking at the dietary intake modules, we are recommending, and most countries do, establish small committees that work on this, because we need specific experts in nutrition to help customize this. There are some topics that influence the sample too. We will look at an example later. But if you choose that a key indicator for you is child marriage, one survey in Ghana did a large oversampling of the population 15 to 24 to capture child marriage with better precision. The number of fieldwork teams and the composition of field teams can also change when you deal with variable costs, because sometimes you need to have an expert on the team that only does one thing. That can be for anthropometry, where we use a measurer. It's for water quality testing, where we use the same measurer to measure the quality of water. There are other things. There are certain topics that require that you actually test questions, or you test your protocols. The last piece on setting up referral systems is a big thing right now for Mix 7, where we have included violence against women modules and mental health. We have to have referral systems in place, and these must be tested. Additionally, the questions have to be really, really tightly revolving around the culture and the language of the country. In Mix, how we build budgets is by using a simple template, a template that has evolved over time, obviously, but it's a template where we try to list all the different components of a survey. You see the very top part of the template here on the left, that we need survey management people, we need people who are involved in pre-testing questionnaires, we need people involved in copy testing the questionnaire, and each of these have unit costs, and we need to hire a certain number of people for a certain number of days. That's how the budgets are built across the world for anything. We have this template, but many countries have their own templates because there are certain regulations they need to follow, or that because of their experience, they have come up with something that really works. We also have the right side of the screen, which is different types of, we call them calculators, right? Different types of automatic creation of the components of the survey. How do we determine how many teams we need to send to the field? And if we choose to send this number of teams to the field, how long would the field work take? So therefore, how long do we need to pay the people to establish the unit cost? And that's all fine. Next slide, please. But how do we go from cost to level of effort or vice versa. First, I want to spend a little bit of time on the very first bullet that I had in the slides that I've been talking about. We're talking about that this association is a major need, but it means different things to different people. What information is it that we really need or that we can actually provide through the work that we've been doing? Lots of people ask us, how much does it cost to add a certain topic to your survey? That's very relevant. You will find a donor or a ministry that is very willing to put some funding in, but they don't want to put half the survey budget in there, or they want to give you a very limited amount of money. This way of looking at it is a really very objective way to determine how much does it really cost, right? Or what could be something that represents the cost to the survey, not just for the specific topic, but how much does it cost the survey in total to put it in? Lots of people will come with the argument saying, oh, but I'm just adding a few questions. It can't cost anything. And that's true enough. I mean, I understand the point. But every question coming from 5 different partners has an aggregate effect that we are quantifying through this method. So by using our survey budget, whatever nature of it is, I was looking just at our template, you can actually find what we can call the fixed cost of the survey by looking at this. You can also find the variable costs that are linked directly to specific topics. And for anything that you have not included in the survey, you can determine the variable costs of including that in the survey. You can compute that. It's not super easy, but some things, it's relatively straightforward. So what we think, where we are right now in our thinking about this, is that if you want to put an additional topic into a survey that has been planned and designed or is underway, we think that the cost of that is not just what we could say it costs to go and buy the supplies or to pay for a trainer or international expert to come flying into the country to help with the survey. No, we think that when you put something additional into the survey, you really should contribute to the overall cost of the survey. So that's sort of our stance at this point. Next slide, please. So what we have come up with, the model that we are currently working with, it is not the only model. We have been through many, but this is where we currently are, and there are other questions to be answered as well. I want to make that completely clear. What we are trying to answer with where we are now is that we want to first look at our total survey budget, right? All surveys come up with a total budget. From that, we want to remove variable cost that is specifically towards one of the topic in the survey. For example, the supplies for anthropometric measurements, that is the height board and the scale. We take that out. It's usually not a lot of money, but it can be substantial for some of the topics. We call this the cost of fixed items or the base budget. And I will tell you why we use that terminology in a second. Because Attila was talking earlier about what is the overall level of effort for different versions of a full questionnaire. So we have said for this purpose, it can be done in other ways, but where we are now, we have set our base level of effort, what we call the base level of effort, meaning from where we will be building on top on with additional topics. We have set that to the sum of the level of effort of all the mixed-based questionnaire topics. Attila showed you the list in the spreadsheet. There are some topics that we call base because they're part of the base questionnaires on mix, and there are some topics that are ComTops or complementary topics. But the sum of the individual efforts required for each topic in the base questionnaire is what we call our base level of effort. So then we use a very, very simple formula to establish a cost of adding an additional topic. We take the level of effort that is computed for each topic. We take it for the topic that we want to add, and we divide by the base level of effort that I have just explained. Then we multiply it by this base budget that I described earlier, the one that has been stripped from variable costs to individual topics. And then finally, on top of this, we add topic-specific cost of this additional topic. That can be if you need to run an additional test, you need to have meetings, you need to increase your sample size. There can be lots of things. Next slide, please. So a couple of examples. For example, I have in my first column, first row here, written an example survey. I have a base level of effort. If you remember, that is the total effort that it requires to implement the base questionnaires of Mix 7. That has been computed to 3,188.6. In my example survey, I have set my budget to 2 million because that is close to becoming an average cost of a survey these days. Although there are many that are cheaper, but there are also many that are more expensive. I also have a column header that is called topic-specific cost. In my example here, topic-specific cost in this survey was $100,000. So that gives me the base budget in the last column, that is $1.9 million. Now, for the examples that I want to do is I want to add things to my survey here. So first, I get a request to add birth weight. There's a big demand in the nutrition and health community for this information. I look up in my scores and find that the topic-specific level of effort here is 84.4. So then I use my formula to compute that this topic should contribute $50,000 more or less to the total effort of the survey. In the next column, I have a 0 because there are no topic-specific costs associated with adding the birth weight topic into a mixed survey. It is very simple. I wouldn't call it simple. It is small. It doesn't require much effort, as you can see with the level of effort. And that gives me a total of still $50,000. How about if I add 5 topics of the postnatal and newborn care modules, where birth weight is one of them? That gives me a total of 330 or so level of effort in combination of these 5 topics. I compute again using the formula, and I find that it is almost $200,000. There are still no topic-specific costs, so therefore, the total cost of adding the topic should be the same. I mean, almost $200,000. How about if I want to add anthropometric measurements for children aged 5 to 9, which is a complementary topic to mix as well? I look up the score. It's a very high score because, as you can imagine, it's a complicated operation, and it puts a lot of pressure on the survey to add anthropometric measurements. So the contribution to the total effort using the formula is above 200,000. But on top of that, I need to go and buy some equipment to send out in the field. In my example, back of the envelope calculations in an average survey, this is approximately a cost of $5,000. That gives me a total cost of $18,000. Finally, my last example is a little bit more heavy. Here I look up what does it cost to put in post-emergency. It is 343 for topic level of effort. Using the formula, I find over 200,000, but there's a topic-specific cost of $100,000. Where does that come from? Is that equipment? No, it's not. It is, in this particular survey, the idea that I have in my mind in my example is I would like to oversample the region or the province of the country that 6 months ago was hit by severe flooding. I would like to increase my sample size for that region. And in order to increase my sample size for the region, I would like to hire an additional team. I would like to hire a field supervisor to control the situation in that region. There will be additional transport costs in that region because it is the most complex part of my country. There has been flooding. There are roads that are not working anymore. And therefore, I'm adding $100,000, topic specific. So the total cost of adding this topic comes to $300,000. I hope I'm making sense. Next slide, please. So there are assumptions and there are many challenges of doing this. I've already revealed some of them. I guess the first one, especially for this webinar, is that it's really complicated. I can see some of the questions you have. You really have to be inside of this work or be very familiar with mix to understand the thinking that is going into this. So this is not something that is immediately digestible, as is most accounting procedures anyway. You have to understand it. So we have to continue working on finding ways to make this more simple. Unfortunately, we have an accounting issue with the method that we are currently working on, right? What you have seen on the screen. We are basically, if we find a survey that wants to add 10 complicated topics, the contributions that we would be asking for those topics to provide to contribute to the survey would go over the total budget of the survey. Maybe it's too light to call it an accounting issue. There are plenty of different solutions to this, and we've been playing with some of them, but the solutions all complicate something already complicated even further. So we have to look at how we can handle this in a simplified manner. Another issue is that topics are rightfully so handled independently. They should be. But it is unfortunately not true that, especially on budgeting, that aspects can be handled independently. For instance, we had the example on the previous slide to add anthropometry for 5 to 9-year-olds. What if you're already doing anthropometry for under 5-year-old children? Then the burden on the survey is still significant, right? You are adding lots of measurements, but you don't need to buy more equipment. You don't need to do additional training. You can probably envelop some of the cost into a burden that is already handled. That is something we have to look at. But there are so many interlinkages between different topics that it's very complicated for us to transform into cost. And then obviously related to this, there are certain thresholds in a survey that really can affect fixed cost. You can't just keep adding. For instance, there's a number of seats in a car that goes to the field. So if you want to add more people, there comes a time where you cannot add more work to these people and you need to add a person. That person needs a seat in the car. So you need a different car or you need 2 cars. That shifts the calculation in a way that is very difficult to take into account. And all of this will be very specific to individual surveys. If it's something we can handle, we will try because we love looking at this, and as I hope you can hear on the presentation. But that's a challenge for us. I think I'm done, Attila. You can jump to the final slide.
So thank you very much, Bo, for this segment of the session, and we can now go into some of the plans that we have in terms of future work on this. And I will go through these very, very quickly to leave time for Q&A. There's a number of things in place in our minds on how we would further improve this in the coming months. One is that we want to improve the level of effort scoring the standard scores, we want to break down each of those dimensions, that 10 dimensions that you saw, into sub-scores, into sub-components, so that it becomes more objective across different people's scoring on what exactly we are scoring here. And we want to get a wider group of people scoring this with us. The entire global mix team, for instance, might be involved in this wider group. We want to also revisit the weights that we have been using. As I mentioned earlier, there was 7 individuals actually who came up with weights for each of the dimensions, and we took the averages of those dimensions. And there's one issue that we haven't really touched upon that much, which is the men's questionnaire issue. The men's questionnaire in mix is almost a replica of the women's questionnaire. Therefore, it has to be dealt with in this level of effort calculations, probably separately. But for the time being, we have taken it as together as one, meaning that if there's a topic which is included both in the women's questionnaire and the men's questionnaire, we have scored that topic only once. For both women and men, there's one score involved in this. However, there are countries who take out men's questionnaires. It is not optional or anything like that in essence, but the truth is that some countries do not do men's questionnaires. Therefore, we have to allow in the scoring and the level of effort calculations the possibility that the men's questionnaire is not going to be there. So how do we account for the absence of that in terms of the level of effort for that specific topic? So that's something that we want to work on. Of course, there's possibilities in terms of working on the statistical properties of this method to look at the sensitivity and the collinearity and do a lot of statistical analysis on how this works. But the most important of all, I think, and this has been there in our minds from the beginning, and then hopefully we're going to be making progress on this finally, is that we want to develop thresholds for determining the optimal magnitude of effort that should go into a survey. In other words, in colloquial terms, where do we stop? Where do we make sure that we don't overload a questionnaire so as to be able to increase our chances of having a successful implementation? That has been a question in our minds. That has been a question during the workshops that we have had, where we introduced this methodology, an earlier version of this methodology, and it is the right question, of course. And this can be extremely useful to come up with, so that we can also advise and we can also arm, if you like, with this ammunition, our survey managers to make sure that after a certain point of the expansion of a questionnaire, there has to be a stop. And to do this, we have one possible tool to use, which is the survey quality index that we have been developing with one of our senior consultants, Pierre Martel. We have been developing the survey quality index, which is looking, as part of it, is looking into data quality. Now, we want to incorporate, if possible, these levels of effort into that index, and to look at the possible correlations between the level of effort and the data quality indicators that we're coming up with, to see if there's any relationship, and there should be. And if we can relate the level of effort to data quality, then we would be able to give advice on this. We obviously want to produce some user-friendly guidance and documentation on this. And we want to extend this to previous rounds and countries. We want to look at the evolution of questionnaires in certain countries. We want to look at the changes and the content of mix over time, etc. And all of these, the methodological aspects of this, we want to open it for peer review as well. Not peer review in terms of journal articles or that kind of thing, but to start with, maybe also involve colleagues from other survey programs or other survey experts to look at the properties of this. And last but not least, Bo has already mentioned it several times, we want to continue this work on linking the level of effort with cost and coming up with even a simpler, maybe more detailed way of describing it, what this is, how level of effort can be converted into cost, and start using it on a standard basis. There we stop, I think, and thank you very much for your attention. Archana, over to you.
Thank you, Attila. Thank you, Bo. We can hear the passion of this type of work in your voices and in the presentation, which was excellent. And definitely we have had a lot of questions. Bo has already answered some of them and continues to. So thank you so much, Bo. But now we'll go into some of the questions that we still have in the Q&A box. Also, I did see people raising their hands. If you don't mind, just putting your question in the Q&A box so we can answer them as we go through them. So I'm just going to start from the top. There's lots of methodological questions I see in the box. So Angwin is asking that they're clear about the grades and weights, but a bit perplexed on the compounding term calculation. So if you could maybe review that a little bit in more detail for Ang. Thank you.
Sorry, was the question for me? I got distracted by answering another question. What did you say?
So no, Ang is asking, I'm clear about the grades and weights, about the methodology, but not so much about the compounding term calculation.
All right, that's what I thought. I think I should let Attila answer that, but I can tell you in short that we are looking at, so the foundation is that each of the domains have a score. But whenever you find that it is a single domain that is scoring high, and the rest is actually relatively easy. We have certain topics that are at least seen as relatively easy to implement, and it's not really challenging for anything other than a single bit. For instance, on data processing, it is very complicated to deal with the data, and there's lots of additional analysis that often needs to be done. That topic would score high just on data processing. Now, what we have done is that we are looking at if a topic is scoring higher than average in a certain domain, then we use it to the compound indicator. So if the topic is more burdensome on a domain higher than the average, it gets added, because there's an effect that if you have multiple domains that are scoring high, then it becomes difficult in several domains, and therefore we should give it extra weight. So that's the idea. I bungled that explanation a bit, Attila. Do you want to add?
No, it was a good explanation, and then just to say that we have also done the analysis after we created the compounding term, and we've done the analysis, and those topics that get scores from the compounding term are by far all of those which are above average challenging and involve high scores on the level of effort dimensions for multiple dimensions all the time. So when we had the original iteration of this, we didn't have the compounding term, and we were looking at the ranges of and the properties and the results of the scoring, and the range was quite narrow from the minimum to the maximum, and it wasn't really. We started feeling that the scoring at that point didn't really take into account this additional efforts that have to be in place, just because a topic is creating a lot of challenges on a large number of dimensions, not only one. So we created this term to account for that kind of additional effort that is needed, which is basically about coordinating and multitasking and dealing with a topic in various fronts all at the same time, and that is the compounding term that we have come up with. It's not to be confused with the terminology that is used in finance and accounting, mind you, because there's a specific way of calculating compounding terms in those equations. So this is not that, but the term here is used in calculating in a different way. just to say that we're going to be coming up with scientific notation of these as well, of course, for later use.
Great, thank you. So we have a question here from Manavi Das. So she's talking about, she understands the scores for each dimension is given. So this is about the methodology. How was this done? So the dimension is given by the principal investigators of the survey and the weights for the compounding term sourced from another expert. Is this correct? So if you could talk a little bit about that, how was that done?
I can say a few things, and maybe you can take it up. For the time being, we're talking about the development of the methodology. When we developed the methodology is the mixed programs methodology, obviously, but the scores actually Bo and I have been the ones to assign the scores to the topics at the globe. This is the global programs scores, if you like. At the country level, if anybody uses this methodology and they want to change those scores, they're most welcome to do so. But this is us knowing all these topics by heart and in detail, of course, felt that we could develop the method by scoring and start implementing the method at the global level at least. So Bo and I have scored. But for the weights, we went to a larger group of people, to all the mixed team members, and we asked them what the weights would be that they would give to each of the dimensions, and they did so, and we took the average of those. So it's the weights have a wider group of people creating them, if you like. Again, at the country level, those weights might change too.
Okay, great, thank you. I don't know, Bo, if you want, I know you answered Iorenza's question, but did you want to say anything about the PHQ-9 at all?
PHQ-9, I'm afraid that I don't understand that language. I know all the variable names in mix, but I can't if this is in the displacement survey, unfortunately.
Okay.
I'm well aware of it, of course.
Thank you. So Sweta is asking about within country topography and the costing estimates, which you discussed at the end, and how does that come into play?
Yeah.
For you, Bo.
It does, right? Because it is more expensive. But we look at it from, when we look at cost, then you would say a statistical office or whomever is implementing the survey, but most often the statistical office have the most experience with how to conduct a survey in a country, right? So we quite often find that we, from donor side, in many cases, UNICEF as a donor to the survey, are trying to cut down on budgets, right? As we very well should. But often if we go a bit too hard, then the survey runs over budget because the statistical officers know best what the situation in the country is. They have the field experience. There are definitely issues with the geography, distances, topography. You're looking at even so we also find that in the beginning of the survey that teams move very slow, and we want them to move very slow because, you know, you have to get experience to be able to get into a role. We don't want people to go out sitting reading from their tablet and just going like a computer with our individuals. We want them to have conversations, and it takes time to learn how to have a conversation in the field. All of this is taken into account in the budget, I would hope, not in the costing, right? Because the costing reflects the budget. But if you find that some of the scores that we are giving in level of effort is too high or too low, they can be adjusted. I think it is very relevant to look at. Maybe it's not a logistical challenge. Maybe we have our colleague Turgay is right now in Nauru, one of the smallest countries of the world, right? There's logistical challenges, but it's not really that difficult to get around. You can all stay at home when you do the survey, right? And meet into work every day and just take a car out to the field. There are lots of different aspects. That's why it becomes so difficult to come up with a global formula for this, right? And because it's complicated. Anyway, I hope I answered.
Thank you, Bo. I think Shunya's comment was answered. We did do costing at the end of that presentation. I'm just going to skip some of these questions that are not specifically related to this topic, and then we can go back if we have some time. I think the topic that the document that Ricardo is referring to is actually this analysis that you've done, but I don't believe there's a document out yet, correct?
No, not for the time being.
Okay.
But we will announce it, of course, and we will, in time, we intend to put it on the website.
Okay. So Ang was just mentioning that some fixed costs might be large economies of scale. I think, Bo, you might sort of refer to this, the buildings, etc. So we can think that was covered. Alistair is asking, how does response quality, oops, it just flipped, vary with the length of the survey and differ between country contexts? At what point would the addition of a module significantly compromise data quality? So did you get to that point where it significantly compromises?
Yeah, probably this is not only a topic, but the questionnaire length, and there's abundant literature on this, of course, the effect. We know that there's a fatigue issue here, but then that was one of the points that we were trying to make at the beginning. The length of the questionnaires is important, of course. The length of the module is important, but also the nature of the module or the topic is important. Is it repetitive? Is it lots of conceptual questions? Is it sensitive questions? Is it there's a lot of things that act upon the burden on the respondent, and it's not only the number of questions in a module. So some of this is actually a $1 million question in a way, but we know that the length and the burden on the respondent is very important on data quality. So what we're trying to get at is something broader, which defines the effort and the burden on the respondent. But hopefully, if we are able later to correlate in terms of looking at many surveys, to correlate the level of effort that was put into that survey versus the quality that came out of the survey, then we might be able to say something more concrete about what is that level of effort that we shouldn't exceed, because if we do exceed, there's going to be problems in the quality of the data. So we're going to be looking at that in the way forward in coming months.
Okay, I'm going to take Tashana's and Gaspar's sort of comments together. One's talking about time, which we've discussed a little bit, and the other one talking about diversity and cultures and how that sort of gets in the mix of all of this. And how would you conceptualize that within this context?
And I was trying to see if I could find the question, but there are many questions. I just wanted to say that it actually fits well with Attila's response just now. That of course there are different cultural contexts, right? And there are characteristics of different populations, right? For instance, we were talking about how burdensome the birth history as a module is to capture fertility and child mortality. It is incredibly burdensome, and there are huge data quality issues with that data if it's not done correctly. However, it depends on the number of children that women get in a country. It depends on the child mortality that has been historically in the country. It depends on a culture's, what should I say, adaptation of the importance of remembering and recording dates and events. If you go to certain cultures, right, where people are now down to less than 2 children per woman, birth history becomes much simpler. On the other hand, there are now so few births and deaths that you may not end up with what we can call quality data. It won't be very representative because the exposure that we are capturing is very limited, right? So it's a mix of all of this. That was sort of the comment that I wanted to make.
Thanks, Bo. I'm just reviewing some more of the questions that or comments that have been coming in, if there was something specifically related to this. This one, Ong has written back saying it's now a bit clear in terms of response to his questions, and was just putting out there, should the midpoint be the cutoff to reflect imposing challenge? I don't know if you want to reflect on that.
Yeah, we can, and it's correct. I mean, we are looking to make basically a variety of really statistical analysis on this to understand what is the what are the better options to view this. What we had worked, as Attila said, we had worked on a different method before, and for now have settled on this. But you certainly have a point that there are other options, and there are other options for many of the things that we have chosen to do, right? So clearly something that we should definitely describe in detail as to why we have settled on certain methods. But thank you.
Okay, I didn't see anything other specifically. I don't know if Attila, Bo, on this particular topic. I think somebody was asking about the Mix 7 questionnaire and a climate topic. If you wanted to respond to that.
Maybe I can say something and you can continue, Bo. You may remember the slide that I showed where there was a sectoral distribution of the content of Mix 7 base and complementary topics, which is not exactly informative of the amount of topics and content we have in relation to climate. There are those topics which can be only associated with a climate sector, let's say climate change, environment sector, but there are many other topics that may be associated with another sector like health, for instance, but it is of critical importance to the environment sector too. Sometimes we have made, I mean, we're coming up with the distribution of those those sectors to calculate level of effort by sectors. We made certain choices, and we put many of them into their more traditionally recognized and for years kind of sectors. Some topics into health, into other sectors, education, etc. But we put only one of them into climate. But there's more content in terms of climate and mix than that distribution showed, and we intend to increase it in time too. Now we are actually just having some conversations about it, some discussions. But the reality is, I think this is important. There's a number of climate change related topics or indicators that can be used to generate data from household surveys, but it's limited.
Yeah.
Most of the climate change, environment related indicators, which are traditionally used now, are actually coming from other types of sources, not household surveys. That's one thing to say. The second thing to say, I'm using this opportunity to say something about this important topic. The second thing is that we actually have a number of topics which fall under another sector, not on climate, but it can be about climate. I'll give an example. We look at post-emergency module that we have. We look at the impact of an emergency, and that emergency itself might be climate related. We might be looking at a climate related emergency and the impact of that on the population. So that becomes a big interest for the climate sector, for the environment sector, of course. And there's a number of tools which are under development by different programs, mostly looking at impacts of climate change or events which have been caused by, which can be associated with climate change. But it's in household surveys, I would think that that kind of information is going to be limited, but there's other data sources, be it big data or even admin data and others, which are going to be very, very important for climate change indicators and data.
Yeah, maybe I can just add, I mean, I have looked at over the past couple of years on literature and accepted global indicators, which is what we are working with in Mix, right? That we have questionnaires that reflect global indicators. And in fact, from the climate change lists of accepted global indicators, including what the UN Statistical Division have endorsed, there are very few that are coming in from household surveys. It's a handful. Lots of them, of that handful, are what we call WASH, right? And there are some that are really undefined, untested. There are more concepts that we would very much like to do, but we don't really feel that we can take on ourselves to develop because we are not experts in this area. And in many respects, climate is one of those cross-cutting issues, just as we have gender and we have adolescents and youth, that lots of the survey actually captures aspects around this, and we just have disaggregated data. I remember when I started with Mix 100 years ago, I was confronted in my office by a colleague saying a Mix doesn't do any gender data. And I was like, what? All our tables are male and female, right? It is gender, but there's nothing that has the label. So that's a bit challenging to put through in a single this category. Anyway.
Thank you. I think we've come to the end of our webinar today. So thank you for your excellent presentation, Attila and Bo, and thank you everyone for your participation and the great questions. The next webinar will take place on May 8th, and it's assessing data quality during fieldwork before it is too late. I think someone had asked a question about quality, so be sure to stay tuned for that one. A reminder that the recordings are available, and they will be available shortly on the Mix YouTube channel. And for our UNICEF staff, it will be available on the SharePoint site. So thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, and bye.